strictly for the drafting process, imagine that you have 2 or 3 coaches inside this booth. Players don't need their headsets on because they don't care about crowd noise or anything. So if I want, I could sit down and talk to like Dokla about a certain matchup, or talk to Terry, who's our support, about where he wants to impact the map. And while we're having that discussion, like we're not all on the same calm line, and like so the communication isn't cluttered. And so then Zab can be talking about something else with other players.
This is Azento from Esports Heaven, and I have here with me Croissant from Optic. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Yorick pick. We've seen it a couple times now. So why is Yorick good in the current meta? Or maybe a better question, why is Yorick good for Optic Gaming?
Yeah, so in any meta, there are certain champions like GP, like Gangplank, who are very popular as a blind pick because he's just really overtuned. He has very few bad matchups, and you can cover his bad matchups by banning them out in the second phase, especially now that we have a first and second phase of picks and bans. For Optic, Dokla was the first person to pull it out in LCS for a very long time. But actually, our Academy top laner, Alarim, who's also played with us in LCS, has been a Yorick player for quite a while. And so when we scrim against our Academy team, when we look at the strength of different top laners and different counter picks, Yorick is something that we utilize pretty well and that we can play around effectively. But yeah, most teams they'll see a GP and they'll pick a even or sometimes even losing matchup into it because there's very few things like Quinn, a lot of solo queue picks that tend to statistically dominate GP have a lot of risks for on stage, and that applies to Yorick as well. But I think we have a specific way of practicing and playing around the Gangplank that is high risk but also high reward. So.
Okay. So about the Ezreal pick as well, NA has been criticized heavily about our Ezreal players. So what's the reasoning behind picking Ezreal within this current meta? Because he has largely a losing record, so that would kind of be indicative to say maybe he's not a good pick, or is it just to player execution at that point?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is based on player execution. People always compare Korea versus North America, but it's not the AD carries piloting the pick themselves, but it's how the whole team plays around it. And I think the way that games here in the NALCS play out, and the way that the supports move around with the junglers really affects how effective the Ezreal is meant to be, or it can be. So like in North America, Ezreal is often picked as a crutch if the support matchup is already skewed and we feel like, or teams feel like, okay, well, the support's going to roam and like impact the mid lane, maybe go with the jungler. So the Ezreal is just going to survive by himself. But in reality, Ezreal has been nerfed so many times and has so many weaknesses that you can't play him like that. You have to stick with the Ezreal, go even or even get an advantage in the early game, and then pressure other parts of the map. And so today, Clutch definitely had a better plan than us coming into the draft phase. It was the first time I feel like we've lost draft in at least like 5 weeks. And there were a couple of things in our preparation for this week that made it hard for us to read the strength of certain picks in the bot lane and in the jungle. So we definitely didn't get what we wanted, but I think Ezreal still definitely has its uses, and we'll see more success in NA. I don't think like just because it's lost like 14 times or whatever that teams are going to be shying away from it, but it's definitely not like a very, very high priority pick. But once other AD carries are off the table like Varus and Ashe, depending on the enemy bot lane, then you kind of want something flexible, and Ezreal is a traditional pairing with Pyke. So that's what we went for today, and we'll be adapting in the future, but yeah.
So speaking of ADCs, now with the newest patch, at least, ADCs are coming back into the meta more, and we're seeing less and less mage bot laners. But that has concerns for the jungle as well too, as historically, at least within the last couple of games, Optic has drafted a really aggressive jungler, such as like Graves, for instance, for Acadian. So how do you think this is going to affect Optic in terms of the draft and maybe having tank tops or tank junglers more often?
So you're asking because AD carries are stronger, whether we'll change our priorities on the top side of the map?
Yeah, because oftentimes when teams end up drafting around their AD carry and getting like a hyper-scaling AD carry, then they end up having more CC on the top side of the map to play around the AD carry later on in the game. So how do you think that's going to play out for just the meta entirely, not even specifically your team?
Yeah. So I think, well, specifically for Optic, a lot of people think that we are relying on the crutch of Dokla split pushing, or that we have a very solidified style, but the truth is that like we're still figuring out a lot of we still have a lot of different compositions in store. We still have a lot of different ways of approaching the draft. You can only have so many cards at any given time so that all your players feel comfortable on their champions. But I think we as a team are more diverse, and players and staff alike, we think out of the box, and we definitely have more ideas than just a traditional like protect the AD carry comp, or like tank top, hyperscaling AD, and then like a mage mid. We've shown that through like our Talon play and a bunch of other picks. So I think that a lot of the teams will be going back towards this meta that you just described, especially teams like Liquid. Don't think that they'll be pulling out anything too crazy, but you can expect to see us going into this, like we are going to be a playoff contender. We're going to try to take down some of these top teams, and I'm always excited to come up with something new or really discuss with the players how to best approach this, because there's a lot of collaboration and discussion in this drafting process, and I think that's one of our biggest strengths in Optic.
Okay. So I wanted to get your thoughts about the new addition of strategic coaches on stage. This has been a topic before. It was at least brought up that this should be a possibility, and now it is. So what are your thoughts in general about strategic coaches being allowed on stage? Do you think it gives your team an advantage, or do you think it also gives teams maybe with Korean coaches who might need a translator on stage more particular advantage than you guys?
So it seems like a pretty weird dynamic for other teams, because you have very limited time between every pick, and even once all the picks are locked in, 60 seconds or so before you got to get off stage. So I don't see Song or Reaper or anyone like trying to communicate some really difficult concept to their translator, and then the translator relaying that. It seems like there would be way too much downtime. What I actually think, I do think that the NALCS is missing booths, and I've never really understood the appeal of booths in the past, like because I like the crowd engagement. I like the fact that when I'm in the audience I can see the players, but strictly for the drafting process, imagine that you have 2 or 3 coaches inside this booth. Players don't need their headsets on because they don't care about crowd noise or anything. So if I want, I could sit down and talk to like Dokla about a certain matchup, or talk to Terry, who's our support, about where he wants to impact the map. And while we're having that discussion, like we're not all on the same calm line, and like so the communication isn't cluttered. And so then Zab can be talking about something else with other players. But really, adding the strategic coach has its benefits, especially when like I have input to bring about the draft, and I can remind people, okay, well, don't forget this pick, don't forget that, because like it's really hard for a lot of people in the moment. Even like, I mean, I was pretty nervous going on stage for the first time this week, but you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. But it is useful to have someone who like knows when to step in and say, "Hey, don't forget this," or "We should do this," and be like, "Trust me." And it works out really well. But yeah, I think that it's not too beneficial for some teams that like the extra strategic coach is probably just going to be standing up there, not really having any space to talk or any reason to talk. Whereas if you had the ability to be on a separate line and talk about something, that would be really interesting. But right now, there doesn't seem to be a significant benefit for the strategic coach thing, and TSM seems to be the only org that's like really openly happy about it on social media or anything. But I'm glad just because it gives me experience, and I'm like very new to this. So.
Okay, that's pretty good food for thought. Well, that's all I really have for you. This has been Azento from Esports Heaven and Croissant from Optic Gaming. Thank you.
Thanks so much, man.
I assume if you made it this far, you probably enjoyed the content. So if you did, subscribe and also check out my other content that's more analytical and opinionated. But otherwise, keep it locked at esportsheaven.com, and I'll see you next time. Peace.